I was packing for a business trip when the knock came. A hard, deliberate rap against the door. The kind of knock that carried news, not courtesy. When I opened it, Sheriff Dalton stood there, hat in hand, face pale. His voice cracked slightly as he said, "Sir, I'm sorry, but your daughter was in a fatal accident 2 hours ago." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My ears rang, my throat tightened. I turned and gestured toward the hallway. That can't be true. She's in bed. She hasn't gone anywhere. Before we continue, thank you so much for your support. Every like, comment, and view means the world to us. We're on a mission to reach our first 1,000 subscribers, and we'd love for you to be part of that journey. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and let's grow together. Now, let's proceed. I was folding shirts along the crease my father taught me when the knock came. 3 firm raps, the kind that make your hands pause without asking your permission. Sheriff Dalton stood on my porch with his hat crushed in one palm, the other braced on the doorframe like he needed it to hold himself upright. His voice was steady but scraped raw. "Sir, I'm sorry to tell you, your daughter was in a fatal accident 2 hours ago." I let the sentence hang between us for a full breath, then another, as if time might change its letters. "That's impossible," I said, stepping aside. "She's asleep. Come see." He followed me down the hall, like a man walking into a church at midnight. I pushed her door open, and the familiar scent of her lotion drifted out. Vanilla and something cheap from the pharmacy she loved. Auburn hair spilled across the pillow. One bare foot peeked from the blanket. I almost laughed from relief, but Dalton didn't move closer. His jaw knotted. His eyes flicked to me and then to the figure in the bed with a calculus I didn't understand. His hand floated to his holster. "Step away from her, sir," he said, and the metal whisper of the snap coming off the gun stung the air. Instinct made me shield the bed with my body. He took half a step more. "That isn't your daughter." The words didn't land. They detonated, rearranging the room, the hallway, my ribs. The girl on the bed opened her eyes, and the first thing I recognized was not love or relief. It was contempt. She sat up slowly, like a performer stepping into a spotlight. "He finally knows," she said, the voice familiar enough to bruise but carrying a sharpness my girl never had. Dalton didn't aim. He lowered the muzzle to the carpet, posture wary, as if he were in a room with a cornered fox. "Ma'am," he said to her, "don't make this worse." To me, he said quietly, "We need to talk outside." I wanted to refuse, to anchor myself to the bed frame and pull the world back into its old place. But the sheriff's eyes had a weight I'd only seen in people who delivered this kind of news before. Out on the porch, he told me what the morgue had already confirmed by fingerprints and dental. The body in the wreck was my daughter's. The road had been wet, the guardrail unforgiving. The girl in my house had been on their radar for 6 months under another name. He didn't say stepdaughter first. He said associate. He said linked to. He said your ex-wife's residence. Only after I whispered the name did he nod, and something like mercy passed across his face. "We suspect she's been living here under your roof while using your accounts and identity as cover," he added, each word a nail. The picture unraveled fast. My ex-wife's remarriage to a man with a flexible relationship to truth, the sudden warmth after years of indifference, the too quick forgiveness when I offered to help with tuition, the smiling thank yous that never quite reached the eyes. I thought I was parenting through a divorce. They were using my house as a front office. Dalton's posture told me there was more, the kind of more that makes good men draw weapons in bedrooms. Inside, she had swung her feet to the floor and met us in the hallway with an ease that pissed me off because it was earned at my expense. "You should have stuck to packing," she said, eyes flicking to the suitcase on my bed. The way she said you erased 10 birthdays, 3 late-night fevers, 100 packed lunches. I told her what Dalton had told me. I spoke the words out loud just to test if they could exist in air. My daughter had died. Her expression didn't crack. A smirk canted her mouth, and she shrugged with a meanness that looked practiced. "You were a bank with a body," she said. "Mom said you'd always pay. And you did, utilities, phone, that emergency transfer every other week. I never met a PIN code you wouldn't hand over with a speech about trust. It wasn't rage that found me. It was a stillness that felt like steel cooling into shape. Dalton asked her to sit. She refused. He asked again, and her eyes flicked, subtle, fast, toward my desk drawer. All the nights I'd worked there, all the times she'd watched me tuck the notebook where I kept my account log under the legal pads, rose in my chest like acid. The sheriff stepped between her and the drawer, hands open, palm out. "This is an active investigation," he said. "You know the warrants we talked about." That was when I realized the gun was less about me and more about habit. He'd already chased her once, or someone like her, and he planned not to repeat mistakes. I gave him the spare key to the drawer. He removed my notebook gently, the way a medic retrieves a watch from a wreck. On the porch again, he flipped pages until he reached the neat columns of dates and amounts I'd logged like a diligent fool. When he left, after the measured warnings, after the polite promise to be in touch, after the card pressed into my palm like a lifeline, I stood in the doorway of the bedroom that had been sanctuary, museum, shrine, and stage set. The girl who'd called me dad, when it suited her, was closing an overnight bag, taking what she said was hers. Makeup, a coat I'd bought at a warehouse sale, a silver necklace that had once belonged to my mother. "You can keep your grief," she said, moving past me. "I'll keep what you paid for." I watched her walk down the sidewalk with a stride that belonged to someone who'd always had a getaway car idling around the corner. When she turned at the gate, she delivered the parting line like something rehearsed in a bathroom mirror. "Tell Mom to call me. We need to sync up." She said it like a colleague, not a daughter. Grief is loud in movies. Mine showed up quiet, like a draft through a cracked window, chilling the edges first. I sat at the kitchen table with Dalton's card and my notebook and listened to the clock insist on moving forward. I turned the pages, and the months became a ledger of charity and blindness. $600 for books, $320 for deposits, $1,200 just this once. I wasn't even angry at the amounts. I was angry at the stories attached to them, at how cleanly they'd fit into the crack between who I wanted to be and who I was. I went to the garage, pulled down the banker's boxes with 15 years of tax returns, estate paperwork from my father, records from the refinance after the divorce. I stacked everything on the dining table and made coffee I didn't drink. It was a kind of waking that has no sunrise. By midnight, I had found 3 checking accounts I didn't remember opening and 1 credit card I'd never used. The addresses tied to their statements were correct, but the email contact wasn't mine. It was a variation with 1 letter shifted, an address I'd seen once when my ex-wife helped set up autopay because I was always late, under the weight of 2 jobs, and a kid whose shoes never seemed to fit for more than a season. Password reset emails had been routed to that shadow address. The recovery phone number ended in the same 4 digits my ex's new husband had once bragged were lucky. When a picture comes into focus, it does so all at once. I felt the click in my chest. They had built the system carefully enough to survive my suspicion, not carefully enough to survive my attention. At 2 a.m., I called the number on Dalton's card and prepared to leave a message. He answered on the second ring. Men in his job learned to sleep light. I told him about the accounts, the email, the numbers. He didn't say, "I told you so." He said, "Document everything before you touch anything." He gave me an address to a digital evidence firm that worked with his office, the kind that pulls a ghost from a machine without smudging its fingerprints. "You're going to want civil, not just criminal," he added. "The law will take their freedom if we prove it. You can take back what they stole." When I hung up, I looked down the length of the table at the boxes and folders and realized there was work I could do besides grieving. Rage fades and sorrow lingers, but discipline can carry both. At dawn, I drove to the accident site alone. The guardrail was already replaced, the ditch scoured clean by rain, the bouquet of cheap flowers zip-tied to a post bleached by morning. I stood where the skid marks would have been and pictured my girl turning the wheel the way she had when I taught her, hands at 9 and 3, shoulders relaxed. I spoke to her the way I hadn't since she was little, out loud and without fear of sounding foolish. "I'm going to put things back in their right names," I said to the empty road. I can't bring you home, but I can bring the truth home. On the drive back, I didn't turn on the radio. I rehearsed the steps in my head like a pilot before takeoff. Gather, preserve, trace, freeze, confront. Some fathers teach their children how to change a tire. Some of us learn how to dismantle a con. The first week was paper. I hired the digital evidence firm Dalton recommended, and they mirrored my devices and the home network without altering metadata, then pulled logs from the router I'd never thought about except when it blinked. The timeline they built was a geometry of theft. Logins from my IP at hours I was at work. Password resets requested minutes after I'd left the house for groceries. Funds moved in round numbers at times that matched calendar invites my ex-wife had sent about drop-offs and pickups. On one terrifying page, a flowchart drew a pipe from my retirement account to a short-lived LLC registered under a cousin of my ex-wife's new husband. That pipe emptied into 2 debit cards picked up at a pharmacy. The receipts for those cards were signed with a crooked loop I recognized from thank you notes she'd forced the girl to write one summer. The second week was people. I met with a forensic accountant who stopped me halfway through my apologies for not catching this sooner. Fraud is a job, she said, tapping her pen on the ledger. You were doing another job, raising a kid, paying a mortgage, trying to be decent. They did this full-time with 2 brains and a head start. She taught me to read my own history with a different lens. Subscriptions created from devices that never entered my house, delivery addresses that redirected through postal lockers, travel points claimed to an email address with my name almost spelled right. Each discovery hurt less than the previous one. Pain wears a groove if you let it. We compiled binders with tabs that would make a paralegal smile. I retained a civil attorney who spoke softly and drafted letters with knives hidden between the commas. The third week was strategy. I didn't freeze everything at once. I closed valves in a sequence that forced them to reveal themselves. First, I shut down the short-lived LLC pipeline with a document served to the cousin, which triggered a panicked text from my ex-wife to the shadow email we already had mirrored. Then I changed the recovery phone on one of the ghost accounts. 2 hours later, a new login attempt came from the same coffee shop near their condo, and the security camera timestamp matched the moment my stepdaughter posted a filtered selfie with a caramel macchiato. When people lie long enough, they forget the world is stitched with cameras and receipts. I recorded everything and handed it to Dalton, who kept his promise and didn't flinch at the pettiness of some transfers or the audacity of others. It's all pattern, he said. Pattern is what juries understand. We baited a hook. I moved a chunk of money into an old savings account I hadn't touched since my father died, and labeled the transfer in my ledger funeral costs, stonework. It was an amount big enough to tempt, and I gave it 72 hours. On the third day, a device in my house, hers, long forgotten under the couch and still paired to the Wi-Fi, pinged the institution's API with a credentials check. An hour later, a password reset request arrived at the shadow email. 30 minutes after that, a $4,000 transfer out was attempted and denied because the forensic accountant had helped me set up a dual authorization the thieves didn't know existed. Dalton signed the affidavit for an expedited warrant with a satisfaction he tried and failed to hide. Now we don't just have the shape, he said. We have the hand holding the pencil. The confrontation wasn't a cinematic ambush. It was a service of process scheduled to look like a family conversation. My ex-wife had texted that we owed each other a talk, a phrase she always used when she wanted me docile. I invited them all to my house at 6 on a Thursday, a time chosen because the neighbors on both sides hosted weekly Bible study and I liked having extra witness. I cooked nothing. I set out water. I wore the navy suit I'd bought for college tours. When they walked in, my ex-wife in a blouse she saved for talking to managers, her husband with the permanent squint of a man who believes people owe him respect, my stepdaughter with sunglasses on her head like a crown. They filled the doorway with confidence. I let them choose seats. I asked if they were comfortable. Then the doorbell rang. Sheriff Dalton came first, 2 deputies in his wake. Behind them, my civil attorney and a process server with a stack of envelopes that looked like wedding invitations. My stepdaughter scowled. My ex-wife laughed the way people laugh when they think they've caught you rehearsing a punchline that won't land. The sheriff put his hat on my table, opened a folder, and read counts in a voice that had read worse. Fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, money laundering. The words filled the room like cold air. My ex-wife's husband stood so abruptly his chair skated backward and tapped the baseboard. One deputy touched his elbow without aggression and without the option to refuse. My ex-wife reached for outrage, found none, and then tried tears. "We're family," she said to me, reaching across a distance she had spent years expanding. "You can't do this to us." Family, I wanted to say, doesn't register a company in a cousin's name to siphon a man's retirement. Family doesn't sit at his kitchen table and calculate exactly how many transfers can be made before fraud alerts trigger. Family doesn't send a girl into his home with a script and a fake gratitude and tell her which drawer holds the notebook with the codes. But I didn't say any of that. I asked Dalton to continue. He did, and when the cuffs clicked, I didn't watch their wrists. I watched their eyes for the first recognition that the rules applied to them, too. My stepdaughter shouted, "Dad," at me once, not as an appeal to love, but as a lever she assumed would still move the machine. The word hit me and slid off like rain from a waxed hood. "My daughter is gone," I said. "You made a job out of her absence." The next morning, before the noise could start, before the calls from numbers I didn't know, before the neighbors who didn't attend Bible study pretended they had, I sat down with my attorney and signed papers that chased the money through the pipes we'd mapped. Injunctions froze accounts I'd never touched, but still owned by the logic of theft. Liens met properties titled in clever trusts. The cousin received a polite letter with impolite consequences. We filed a civil suit that didn't roar. It moved like weather, slow and inevitable. Dalton's office did its part with arraignments and bond hearings. I did mine by telling the truth cleanly when asked and not talking when I wasn't. There is a dignity to paperwork when it is the instrument of repair. Each form felt like a plank in a bridge back to my own name. I buried my daughter on a mild afternoon under a tree that offered shade without asking anything in return. I had chosen the stone in advance, before baiting the hook, because I refused to let revenge write all of the week's chapters. I spoke at the graveside without notes. I told the truth the way she liked her music, unadorned, honest, leaving room for silence. After the others left, I stayed and told her what I had done and what I still planned to do. The scholarship at her high school in her name. The freezer in the garage packed with casseroles I'd learned to make and deliver to other fathers when the knock came for them. I promised to be better with passwords and with people, to keep my notebook but not my naivete, to measure love by presents rather than receipts. Weeks later, when the first settlement deposits landed in the escrow account and the restitution orders spelled their long arithmetic, I walked through my house and noticed it had become quiet in a different way. Not the quiet of absence, the quiet of order reasserted. I boxed her clothes for donation carefully, keeping a sweater that still held the faintest trace of her perfume. I repainted the bedroom because healing is sometimes a gallon of eggshell and a Saturday with the windows open. I wrote 3 letters I would never send. One to the girl who had worn my daughter's routines like a disguise. One to the woman I had married and lost twice, and one to the man who thought charm could beat math. They weren't apologies. They were acknowledgments of facts followed by boundaries written so plainly even a thief could understand them. There is a story people like to tell about revenge, that it is a fire that scorches the hand that strikes the match. Sometimes that's true, but sometimes revenge is not fire, it is architecture. You measure twice and cut once. You pull out rot and sister new beams to the old. You invite an inspector who isn't your friend to tell you what still won't hold. You spend more than you wanted, and at the end you don't have your original house back. You have a structure that knows what it survived. I don't smile when I think about the night they were led out of my living room in handcuffs. I don't replay it for pleasure. I carry it like a deed filed with the county, proof that a place belongs to its rightful owner again. When people ask, I tell them the truth without embellishment. The sheriff knocked, and my life split along a line I couldn't see until it was finished. My daughter died on a wet road that had nothing to do with our wars. A girl I'd fed and clothed used my roof as cover, while others rearranged my name for profit. I learned to read my own bills like a detective and my own heart like a contract. I did not forgive them. I did not turn the other cheek. I turned to the work and let the work make me honest. Justice came in paper and court dates and balances returned. Revenge came in the refusal to let their story be the last line. And when I stand at the tree and read her name aloud, I feel the world click one notch closer to level, and that is enough. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Your support means the world to us.